Order of combining wet and dry ingredients when baking. I've always learned that you add the wet ingredients to the dry ones. Looking at some recipes, combine the dry ingredients, the flour. Add the other wet ingredients, melted butter. Pour wet ingredients into dry and mix until just combined. Mix dry ingredients together, mix wet ingredients together, and combine wet and dry together and bake. Make a well in the dry ingredients and then pour the wet ingredients into the well and mix. Is there a reason to always add wet to dry and not the other way around? Are there any types of recipes that, in fact, reverse the order?
The dry ingredients are lighter, less dense, and less viscous than the wet, which means they'll have a tendency to float on top of the wet. The dry ingredients that come in contact with the wet will form a sort of skin, preventing the wet from distributing throughout the dry. You end up with clumps of dry, unmixed, and, ultimately, uncooked dry ingredients. Pouring wet into dry forces agitation and more uniform distribution. Most cakes, muffins, biscuits and cookies are made from two primary mixing methods, the two-bowl method, aka muffin method. This mixing method is used primarily when a liquid fat is being used, typically oil but sometimes melted butter. This mixing method has the dry ingredients done in one bowl with a well made in the center so that the liquid ingredients can be added. Mixing the wet and dry ingredients separate from one another allows each type to be thoroughly mixed, blended without fear of overmixing and thus toughening the texture. Toughness is due to agitation when water-based liquids are introduced to wheat flour. The well in the center of dry ingredients allows the dry ingredients to be folded over on top of the liquid and then gently incorporated just until mixed. Adding the liquid flat on top or the flour on top of the liquid would lead to overmixing. The creaming method. This mixing method is used for items where a finer crumb is desired, cakes, fine crumbed muffins, typically blueberry, and uses solid fats that are creamed with sugar for aeration and then have the flavorings added to the fat, as most extracts are oil soluble and distribute flavor better in the fat rather than water-based ingredients, followed by eggs. Finally, the milk and dry ingredients are usually added alternately, starting and ending with the flour. The creaming method produces a finer, more tender crumb due to higher ratio of fat to flour. More fat equals tenderness, more sugar used than in the two-bowl method. Sugar is a tenderizing agent, among many other things, due to its hygroscopic nature, ability to attract moisture from surrounding atmosphere. Look here for more on sugar, see link 1. Adding the flour first helps to coat the proteins, gluten, with fat so that it can't form strong bonds with other gluten strands, thus shortening the gluten strands and producing a more tender cake. If liquid is introduced first, the gluten won't be lubricated as well by the fat, and if too much liquid is added to the fat, particularly if the liquid isn't at room temperature, it can cause the fat to clump and the mix will appear curdled. This will lead to a coarser texture in the cake. The liquid needs to be emulsified in the fat rather than having the fat surrounded by the liquid.